Hey guys, Kyle slash Animaspy slash IMAXNation1980 here, and I'm back. I'm here to talk about some more animation news. A couple of weeks have gone by. I was actually on vacation in Florida, and quite a bit happened. So I wanted to do a little recap, and like the first episode of this, series, which may or may not take off. I'm gonna see how far it goes. I'm not gonna guarantee anything. In the first episode, I established that I wanted to do, not rambles per se, but recaps of animation news and what's been going on lately, and I wanted to, make this a sort of series. Every couple of weeks or so I would kind of form my thoughts and expand upon them, because you can only do so much in a blog post. But watch the first video, I'm going to get all that mumbo-jumbo out of the way. So, what has happened in animation recently? Well, we got Cars 3 coming out on Friday, and we also happen to have seen Dreamworks. Well, Dreamworks happened to make some history. They released a film that they outsourced to another studio. Not a sister studio or brother studio, but one that they outsourced to another studio, period. In a film that ended up costing them $38 million, making it one of the cheapest big studio computer animated movies to date. That movie was Captain Underpants, the first epic movie based on the Dav Pilkey book series of the same name. I have not seen Captain Underpants yet, but I'm going to catch up with all that stuff soon because I really want to see it. And the reviews indicate that it's the best Dreamworks movie in a long, long while. Now, who would have thought Captain Underpants being a top-notch movie and a top-notch Dreamworks movie? Because we know that sometimes Dreamworks will release a movie that's a little more divisive, or one that doesn't get the best of reviews. I mean, The Boss Baby got middling critical reception at best, kind of like Home did. And then you have ones where the reception's a little more tepid, like The Croods or Turbo, where the reaction's kind of like, it's alright, there's some good things, there's some bad things. But it seems like a lot of people agree that Captain Underpants is a really fun movie, and it's unique amongst most CG pictures being released today, and that's why I want to see it, because it actually, stylistically, I love the look of it. I mean, it's close to the books, but at the same time, it's CG, but it doesn't adhere to that it has to be hyper-real rule. It actually looks like a vibrant comic book. And that's what we should be doing with animation, not copying the photoreal style that, studios have been chasing since the early Pixar days. I want to see more movies like Captain Underpants and The Book of Life and the Peanuts movie. CG movies like that actually experiment with the medium and can take it to cool places. It's kind of similar to what the UPA did in the 50s, the late 40s going into the early to mid 50s. This was a studio that challenged the Disney Naturalism. This is a studio that challenged the look of MGM's movies, and it even challenged the look and production values of Warner Brothers cartoons and such. This was an outlier studio during the Golden Age that wanted to really, really do some cool things with animation. And if you look at their works, they're very almost iconoclastic in a way. And then you felt the influence at Disney and at MGM if you look at some of the Disney shorts and featurettes made during the mid-50s and up into the late 50s, Paul Bunyan and Toot Whistle Plunk and Boom. If you look at those, you can see the UPA influence. And if you watch the later Tom and Jerry shorts from the Hanna-Barbera era, the ones that came out in the late 50s, the last run of Hanna-Barbera Tom and Jerry's, you can see that UPA look in some of the visuals as well. I like that some, big-time studios are going this route, even though DreamWorks didn't really do the animation for Captain Underpants. Micros Image did. Micros Image was the studio that they outsourced it to. They sent it up to Canada, and then they made the feature, and it came back at a great $38 million. So nobody's really fretting about how it's doing at the box office. It's actually one of the lowest opening DreamWorks movies, but it doesn't matter because it didn't cost as much as the typical DreamWorks movie. Whereas something like Boss Baby, which was made up in Glendale, that cost about $125 million to make, which is a ridiculous amount of money. And I've been saying this on my blog for years, these studios need to really dial down the costs. And the other thing is, when you dial down the costs, I think you can also use that opportunity to take a real risk. Illumination does not do this, and this is what kind of miffs me about them. It's like Illumination, kind of led this charge in doing lower budget CG animation in the modern era. I'm not saying that they led the charge in general, but in the modern era, they've been doing this, and Sony Animation has slowly been following suit. I mean, look at the production costs of, say, The First Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, and then look at the production costs of Smurfs: The Lost Village. You know, we've come a long way. Anyways, long story short, I kind of wish that, you know, some of those other studios would take advantage of the lower budgets, because I don't see things like the Emoji Movie or the umpteenth sequels to Despicable Me and Minions as risks. That's why I commend Real Effects. Real Effects made The Book of Life, and I think that took a lot of visual risks for an animated feature, a wide-release animated picture. And I look at something like, you know, the Peanuts movie. I think that took a big risk, too. Instead of translating the comic strips, the Charlie Brown characters, into photoreal CGI, they just made this really cool painterly look that was like the strips drawings come to life. And that was really, really cool. I mean, if we absolutely can't have a 2D movie, well, that was, you know, good enough. You know, that was more than enough to suffice. So I'm kind of hoping that future cartoony movies like that, like Captain Underpants, they go these wild routes. And I want to see these studios experiment more, because I'm sick of photorealism. I'm sick of every texture being this highly detailed, intricate thing. I'm sick of every animated feature having to look like live action, but with minor alterations. It's like, I don't need it to be the most realistic thing ever. And I'm sure as hell that audiences don't either. Anyways, a lot of people are asking, what does Captain Underpants' performance mean? You know, what does it mean? What is it going to kick off? Cartoon Brew is more concerned about what this means for American animation and what it means for, you know, American-based studios. Does it mean that more jobs will just go to Canada? Will they outsource these things more? Because again, this is the first time, not counting any co-productions that Dreamworks ever made, this is the first time Dreamworks outsourced a picture to a whole other studio. And when that was announced back in 2015 that Captain Underpants was going to be done in Canada at Micros Animation Montreal, it was a big shock. It's like, what? They've outsourced this to some studio up in Canada? Whereas Sony Pictures Animation moved to Canada, Dreamworks outsourced a picture to another studio in Canada. Warner Animation Group sends, you know, Warner Animation Group functions differently. They come up with the stuff here at home in America, and then they send it to other studios to do. Animalogic in Australia, but now they're in Vancouver. And Sony Pictures Imageworks, which did Storks and now is doing Smallfoot. They're up in Canada as well. And the animation comes back at, you know, a low budget. So we're starting to see, I think we're starting to see the small animated feature take over. And I think we're starting, you know, to see the industry realizing that not every animated feature has to be this big, gargantuan, $100 million costing tentpole. You know, they all can't be that. And unfortunately, a high budget puts a lot of restrictions on an animated picture. There's only so many risks they can take, and you got worried executives, worried bean counters. You know, it's a harsh truth, but here in America, innovation is not necessarily animation's end goal right now. Feature animation is aiming to be the family-friendly equivalent of, say, superhero movies or blockbuster movies like Transformers. You know, you see the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you see the Transformers series, you see all these franchises buckling up lots of money, you know, domestically and abroad. And that's what I think a lot of American animation executives want. They don't care about, you know, new feats in animation. They don't care about innovation. They just want something that will rival that, but be a family-friendly alternative, because a lot of those blockbuster franchises are PG-13. And, you know, some parents might find them inappropriate for their children. You know, Transformers, you know, is a good example. You know, that's supposed to be a kid's thing. It started out as a Saturday morning cartoon in a toy line, and, you know, a toy line meant for kids. But the movies, the Michael Bay Transformers movies, they're PG-13, they're pretty violent, there's language in them, you know, there's a lot of innuendos and, you know, humor that some parents might find inappropriate for their 5-year-old. So, the executives probably see it this way. There's that, and now here's the PG version of that, with, you know, Despicable Me sequels and, you know, Pixar movies, you know. They treat animation like it's a tentpole thing. It's got to be like a tentpole thing. It's got to be a franchise starter. But I think little by little, we're starting to see some animated movies say, no, it doesn't have to be just that. Exhibit A is Storks. When Storks came out, I wrote a piece about why, because I have two blogs. I have Kyle's Animated World, and I have another one which is on WordPress, which is called Kyle Loves Animation and More. That's less an animation site and more a site about personal stuff, so tread those waters cautiously, because I don't always talk about animation on that site. I talk about other things that I love, life stories, how things are going in my life, the occasional post about anxiety and such, and what it's like to have something like what I have, Asperger's syndrome. Anyways, I wrote a piece there about why Storks gives me hope about the future of animation. Some of us were a little shocked when Storks opened so low at the box office. But then, I realized it's a $70 million costing movie, and if it misses $100 million domestically and makes enough worldwide, what's the fuss? Storks ended up making roughly 2.5 times its production budget. And I don't think Warner Brothers ever officially stated that Storks was a miss. And then I eventually saw the movie, and I was very surprised by how good it was. The almighty Rotten Tomatoes would have led you to believe that it was a middling movie. It had like a 62 or something. Meaning 62% of critics gave it a positive review. And it doesn't matter how positive those reviews are, if they were glowing or if they were just tepid. It was alright reviews. Again, Rotten Tomatoes is not a good gauge of what you should see, especially when it comes to a movie like Storks. Because I ended up giving Storks like an 8.5 out of 10. I ended up really liking that movie. It was a really good Warner Brothers-like cartoon, from Warner Animation Group. Even though, ironically, they farmed it out to Sony Imageworks, it really had the feel and the energy of an old Warner Brothers cartoon. And that, I could go on about it, but all I'm going to say is I ended up really liking that movie, and I think it should have been a bigger success. But it wasn't, and it's no big deal, because Warner Animation Group is going right ahead with Smallfoot, which is going to be animated by the same studio, Sony Pictures Imageworks. Although I don't think it's going to look like Storks, because a lot of the pre-production and design work was done by Sergio Pablos, and he has a studio in Spain. He's currently working on Claws for Cinesight Animation. That's really exciting stuff right there. You got to follow Sergio Pablos on Facebook. His studio, they're always posting work in progress stuff from Klaus, and it's now in production. That thing is going to happen. It looks so beautiful. But long story short, Storks gave me hope because it showed. It didn't have to be Despicable Me sized. It didn't even have to be the size of something more modest like Hotel Transylvania. It was decent sized. It made a fair amount. It wasn't a blockbuster or anything, and it's not a flop. So I think with that, I think we're starting to see that come back up again. That not every film has to be the size of Despicable Me or Frozen or any Pixar movie or Zootopia or Sing. It doesn't have to be that big. Just like how every live-action movie doesn't have to be the size of The Avengers or Jurassic World or Star Wars. Not everything is meant to be a blockbuster. Not everything is meant to be a tentpole. So why can't we just have some smaller animated movies that are not worried about having a franchise waiting around the corner? Expectations breathing down their necks. I think executives look at animation like that. They kind of just go into it thinking, well, does it have sequel potential? What kind of merchandising potential does it have? Is it the kind of thing that will spawn a franchise? It's like a franchise. It's like, hey, not every animated movie is some burger stand in San Bernardino, California that'll somehow get mutated into a fast food franchise. It's not that. Some animated movies are small, and they're meant to be, smaller and sometimes more personal stories. Now, I'm not saying that a big animated movie can't be a personal story either, and we've seen that in spades with Disney Animation, with Pixar, sometimes with Dreamworks and some of the other studios, but not every animated movie has to be a franchise launcher. We're not going to get a Storks 2, 3, 4, Storks the spinoff about the Pigeon Toady, Storks Cinematic Universe. We're not getting that. And we didn't need to get it in the first place, if you catch my drift. So, yeah. Then came Sony Animation's Smurfs The Lost Village. Smurfs The Lost Village was the all-animated reboot of the Smurfs film series from Sony Animation, the first two being live-action hybrid movies with a completely different cast, a slightly different tone. The new movie arrived on the scene with middling reviews at best, mostly negative, and it was the worst, box office-wise, it was the weakest one. It opened with maybe 13 million. It's only made about $40-something million domestically, and it made about $190 million worldwide so far. The thing only cost $60 million to make, and it looks beautiful for a $60 million costing animated movie. But what they did was they eschewed that hyperreal look, and went for a more painterly look. Now, there's a lot of textures and details in it, but it still looks marvelous for a picture its size. Visually, I'd say it's squarely between the usual and the more abstract, so it's kind of like the bridge between the two. I haven't seen the movie yet, but I'm glad that it didn't cost as much. Sony Animation, after Emoji Movie, is going to do this movie called The Star. It's a retelling of the Nativity. And they outsourced that to Cinesite, and they're up in Montreal. I think it's Montreal, correct me if I'm wrong. They're up in Canada, that's all I know. And that feature's probably going to come back at $60 million. That's good, because, let's be honest, a Nativity retelling in animation is probably not going to be the next Hotel Transylvania. It's probably not going to be the next Ice Age. It's not going to be one of those more modest performing movies. If it does, I'll eat crow, but, let's try to be realistic in expectations. It's going to do fine. It's not going to be this huge, epic, gargantuan animation tentpole. So, outsourcing it was probably smart in hindsight. And I like that Sony is now starting to get the picture as well. They're not expecting all their movies to be Pixar-sized or Illumination-sized. And I think we started seeing that a couple years ago, like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2 cost $78 million. The original cost $100 million, and that was back in 2009, but now they've kind of settled. It's like, okay, let's be a little more conservative here. And it's a good thing that they didn't amp up the budget. It's a good thing they reduced it, because Cloudy 2, looking at the box office results, kind of seems more profitable than the first one. I'm surprised they haven't done a third one yet, but who knows with Sony Animation these days. It seems like there's always a change in direction. So I don't necessarily think that Captain Underpants opening is historic by any means. I think it's just another peg. I think it's just another stepping stone to a possible future where the small-scale animated feature comes into play again. Because if you look at the rest of the year, outside of movies like Cars 3 and Despicable Me 3 and Coco, what else is there? I mean, let's run down. Let's do a rundown of some of the features. There's the Emoji Movie. Now, that may or may not break $100 million. I have a strong feeling it might not, because there's probably a lot of adults and animation fans like me who are in their 20s who are looking at that and they're saying, no, and would rather go see something smarter like a Pixar film or a Disney animation film or a good Dreamworks movie. So I think the adult appeal is really going to make or break the Emoji Movie. I know a lot of people like to say, oh, the kids. Well, someone's got to take the kids. If you aim squarely at the kids and half-heartedly try to get the adults interested, you're just not going to have a huge grossing movie. And I don't think the Emoji Movie is really going to be all that big. If it does Hotel Transylvania numbers, I'll be very, very surprised. I honestly see this thing topping out at like $90 million. And that's probably fine, because Sony probably didn't overspend on it. Sony probably spent around $60 million on it. And, animation-wise, it doesn't look too bad. Oh no, I'm saying something positive about the Emoji Movie. No, visually it looks fine. It doesn't look terrible. I mean, it is being made by a big studio, but I don't expect the budget on that one to be huge. I look at things like, there's the Nut Job 2. It's probably going to make as much as the first one or less. Again, being another small-scale Canadian production that didn't cost anything to make. And then there's Lego Ninjago Movie. Again, Warner Animation, outsourcing that to another studio. In this case, it's Animalogic in Australia. I think the first, because I know Animalogic now has a unit in Vancouver, but I don't think the Vancouver unit is doing features until the Lego Movie sequel, which opens in 2019. So, as far as I know, Ninjago is also an Australian production, and that's probably going to come back at $60 million as well, somewhere around the cost of the first Lego Movie and Storks. Lego Batman Movie ended up costing $85 million for some reason. That's probably because of the whole DC thing, and I don't know, maybe it's just fudging, I don't know. But that's going to come back at a small cost, and it doesn't matter how much it makes domestically or worldwide, as I don't think it's going to gross anywhere near Lego Batman, but it could gross around the same amount Storks made. Who knows? But I don't expect it to be huge. It's also a, late summer, early autumn release. It's at that period when summer's turning to fall, so it could go either way. I'm not going to count Goosebumps, because that's really just a live-action picture with lots of CGI that just happens to have Sony Animation's name on it. I think that'll more or less perform like the first one. My Little Pony the movie. Lionsgate is distributing. It's probably not going to do as well, but, you know, the My Little Pony fan base is huge, so maybe it'll do okay. And I don't think anyone's expecting it to be a blockbuster either. It probably didn't cost much to make, which is fine. That way, and it's probably going to make a lot. It's going to make a real killing in toy sales, so... Again, that's another one that they're not expecting to be a huge blockbuster. The Star, same thing. And then lastly, Ferdinand, which 20th Century Fox is releasing the same day as Star Wars The Last Jedi. And I know what you're probably saying. It's counter-programming. You know, parents can take their kids to that if they think it's too intense for Star Wars. I hate that. I hate that idea. It's like, you make a good animated feature. I mean... I don't know if Ferdinand's going to be good or bad. It looks solid from the trailer. I was actually very surprised when I watched the trailer. I actually got a few chuckles, and I thought it looked very nice. You know, it looked like a very nice, old-fashioned comedy animated film. And it's a take on a classic story that Walt Disney himself adapted. But, I don't think Ferdinand might perform like Hotel Transylvania, or it might perform more like Storks. Again, it's another one that I don't see being a huge hit, although it is a Christmas season release. The original release date it had, I thought, was more feasible. Open after Star Wars opens, and, that initial rush kind of dies down a bit. But no, same day as Star Wars it is. Alvin and the Chipmunks 4, a family-friendly title that Fox released, the same day as Star Wars The Force Awakens, that actually held up fine against The Force Awakens, despite the fact that the current iteration of Alvin and the Chipmunks outstayed its welcome, but it still made decent numbers. I mean, that came out when I started working at my local movie theater, and huge crowds, like for weeks straight, for Alvin and the Chipmunks 4. So yeah, it showed that, that counter-programming really works. But I think Ferdinand is more than just Alvin and the Chipmunks. I think it's more than just kiddie counter-programming to Star Wars. I think it could be more, but obviously Fox is not looking at a huge gross with that one, and Blue Sky normally spends conservative amounts on their animated features, not being a studio based in California. So, if it doesn't crack $100 million, it'll probably be no big deal, as long as the worldwide grosses add up. Again, I think we're sort of entering a wave now, where the small-scale animated feature has come back, because for a little while, it was all about the tentpoles. It was all about the tentpoles. But now we're seeing some pretty decent quality small animated features coming back into the ring, because for a little while, it seemed like small animated features, well, the mainstream ones that is, were things like Alpha and Omega and Hoodwink 2 and Weinstein Piddle Paddle like that. But now we're starting to see, the bigger studios make smaller scale animated features, and some of them are actually pretty good quality, like Storks. So I'm pretty, interested in seeing where this goes, and interested in seeing what it leads to, and I wonder what kind of content will come as a result. Like, with the smaller budgets, will the studios take more risks, visually and narratively? Who knows? I think it's a little premature to speculate right now, because the animation industry can be predictable and unpredictable at the same time. So we're going to move on from box office, and now I want to talk about the new trailer for Pixar's Coco. It's really just a teaser, though. It's a second teaser that pretty much expands upon what we saw in the first teaser. Now, what made the first teaser so cool was how atmospheric it was. It was slow. It was all about building up the premise and establishing who Miguel is, and how Pixar's take on Day of the Dead and the Land of the Dead is uniquely their own, and how it's dissimilar to what we saw in the Book of Life. And it was a very good teaser. I really, really enjoyed it. It set up everything very nicely. It set up the whole thing with Ernest de la Cruz very nicely, saying everything very nicely. I just really loved that teaser. It was one of the better Pixar teasers, because Pixar teasers are usually very gag-oriented, but recently we've been seeing, Pixar and Disney marketing break away from that. The teaser for Cars 3 was the wreck, and it was all done up in muted colors and no music at all, and it was just very straight to the point, like, from this point onwards, everything will change, And the teaser for The Good Dinosaur was the meteor missing, and then a montage of scenes from the movie set to this epic music. And, you know, he had the teaser for Brave, where it was all epic in tone, and it ends with her facing off against Mordu. You know, Pixar is kind of slowly airing away from that gag teaser, although they do revisit it sometimes. You know, Monsters University, Inside Out, and Finding Dory's teasers were all humor-based. But Cars 3, oddly enough, wasn't. And who knows what they'll do for the Incredibles 2 teaser. Will it be, you know, a dark scene, like a more heavier tone where Mr. Incredible is taking on a bad guy or something and he gets defeated by the bad guy? Or will it be a silly teaser similar to the one where he's trying to get his belt on? Who knows? With the Coco teaser, it was all about atmosphere and the premise itself. And with this new teaser, it's more humor. Although the teaser does show us more of the land of the dead and what the spirits of the deceased will look like. And they look like a real 180 from the Book of Life. And they actually have like eyeballs inside the skull eye sockets, which I think is a choice that is a little interesting. I'm actually taking a little time getting used to it, but I do like their more mechanical take on the land of the dead. It has that sort of world building that made movies like Monsters, Inc. and Wall-E and Inside Out so unique. It's definitely more of that mechanical, very detailed kind of world, and I think it's a nice contrast from the Book of Life and its more festive and more abstract take on the land of the dead. So, but I don't want to compare it to the Book of Life too much because I like the Book of Life a lot, and I want Coco to succeed as well. I'm glad that there's 2 movies about, you know, a big Mexican holiday. And writer of the Book of Life, Jorge Gutierrez, he would want you to support Coco as well. He has said on Twitter many times, I'm rooting for Pixar, I'm rooting for Lee Unkrich, you know, more representation. And instead, you know, the internet would rather have flame wars, you know. Pixar, you know, why are they ripping off the Book of Life? And then there's the other side saying, Book of Life? You ripped it off while Pixar was working on it and got yours out first. You know, it's so ridiculous. And I think Jorge Gutierrez, you know, and Lee Unkrich too, they ended it nicely. They just said, guys, we're friends. And Jorge Gutierrez says, I'm looking forward to Coco. So, there's that. So I think Coco looks unique. It doesn't look like, you know, a Book of Life light movie. Okay, so now one complaint I do understand. The animation style itself. Coco is yet another Pixar movie, and you know how Pixar operates. Pixar has never really made a movie that deviates from their photorealistic sheen. Now, some movies design-wise are different, like you can't say Up looks exactly like Wall-E, and you can't say A Bug's Life looks exactly like Monsters, Inc. Each movie is pretty unique in the visuals and the character design and such. You know, The Incredibles, the character designs and world of that movie look nothing like the other Pixar movies. When I say Pixar has a style, I mean the way their movies are textured, the way they're lit. They have that quasi-live-action, photorealistic feel. And I think they kind of, you know, fostered that with Toy Story and with A Bug's Life and with Monsters, Inc. and Finding Nemo. Dreamworks kind of did it too with Ants and Shrek. Although sometimes Dreamworks will make a movie like Captain Underpants or something that's more visually abstract like that. You know, Blue Sky made the Peanuts movie. Pixar has yet to make a movie that's abstract like that. They have yet to make something that's a CGI movie but is more abstract. So Coco is yet another hyper-realistic Pixar movie. But design-wise, it looks different from most of the other Pixar movies. And it looks similar to some of them too. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a house style. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the way it looks, not the design of it, not the art direction, but just the way it looks. It's another hyper-real picture with so many details, and honestly, I'm not too miffed about that because I think Pixar kind of coined that style with Toy Story back in 1995 and continued to refine it over the next couple of decades. I'm okay with that, honestly. That being said, I take other studios to task. I wish that other studios in the realm of CGI had avoided that and went different directions with CGI, like what we're seeing now with Captain Underpants and Book of Life and the Peanuts movie. You know, those are the holy trinity, the 3 examples that I point to when it comes to CGI, you know, going these different weirdo routes. Pixar is probably not going to go that route anytime soon. They're probably not going to make a CG film that has more of a traditional animation look or something that's less photorealistic. For short films, they break that, as evidenced in Sanjay's Super Team. And I kind of wish they'd make a feature that was similar to Sanjay's Super Team, or something like Disney's Paperman or Feast or Inner Workings. But we shall see. I don't know if Pixar is ever going to make that leap. I think I get the sense that they're just going to keep to their look. Not their style, but their look. And I think they're just going to keep refining it with each new feature. So Coco's overall look and feel is going to adhere to that. And I understand that that's a huge, that's not, I don't see it as necessarily a downgrade from the Book of Life. To me, the Book of Life is like Picasso, going off of what Charles Solomon, animation historian, once said in one of his books, Enchanted Drawings. The Book of Life is more the Picasso, the more abstract feature, the one that's not preoccupied with looking like real life. Whereas the Pixar movie is more like Rembrandt, where it is sort of preoccupied with looking so hyper-realistic and being so close to real life. And again, that's their style. I wish other people didn't follow that style. But I'm okay with Pixar kind of sticking to it, although I wish they would deviate too, but we might see that in the future. Again, nothing is cemented forever. Things will change. But yes, it was an enjoyable little teaser. I call it a teaser. They say official US trailer or whatever. It's teaser number 2. It's 1 minute and 42 seconds long. Hopefully with the full trailer, the real full trailer, we really get to know this world and what we're in for. And I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of coverage on it at D23 next month. I keep forgetting it's next month because usually it's every August. But this year it's going to take place in July, so that's very, very exciting. And Coco is probably going to be, the centerpiece of all of it. That and Ralph Breaks the Internet. In other animation news, Fox Animation has beefed up their slate yet again, adding 2 book adaptations. The first of which is called The Care and Feeding of a Pet Black Hole, and it's about this roughly 11-year-old girl who takes home a pet black hole. So right there, you can from right there, you're saying to yourself, this is perfect for animation. And I think it's going to take place in the 70s because it involves the Golden Record that was launched into space in 1977. I haven't read the book, but this is what I've heard from the reports. And the thing is, the black hole begins to eat everything. It begins to suck in everything. It takes her dog, her brother, and then she has to go inside this black hole and get them back. And according to the reports, this is going to be a story that mirrors how she's dealing with the loss of her father. And that sounds like it's going to be really creative and really emotional at the same time. Now, it wasn't specified who's doing it. It's just Fox Animation has picked it up. And as I explained before, Fox Animation is kind of like an umbrella for other animation studios. Not every Fox Animation thing is a Blue Sky picture. There's Blue Sky, but there's also other studios doing stuff for them as well. Like The Dam Keeper, which is going to be made by the studio that made the original Dam Keeper short, Tonko House. And A Tale of Momentum and Inertia is going to be made by the studio that made that short film. That's a feature based on a short film. If you haven't seen the short film, definitely watch it. It's really, really cool. Not sure how they're going to make it work as a feature, but it has potential. The name of the production company that made that short film is called House Special. They're going to do the feature-length film as well. So not every Fox Animation production is going to be a Blue Sky film. Blue Sky is just one studio. Simpsons movie technically counts as a Fox Animation movie because it's an animated movie theatrically released by Fox. It's just an umbrella. It's not an actual, studio that, you see the logo before the movie. No, it's just like an umbrella the way Warner Animation Group is. Although Warner Animation Group has a logo. It's more like Paramount Animation in that regard. So long story short, they've been picking up all these movies and all these adaptations, all these projects, and some of them are going to be Blue Sky Pictures, some of them are not going to be Blue Sky Pictures. I'm not sure what this Pet Black Hole movie is going to be. I don't know what studio will do it. Maybe it'll be a small studio like Micros, who did Captain Underpants, of course. Fox will probably look upon those small studios in Canada and overseas to do these features. But I love the premise of this one. The other one that they picked up was Molly Ostertag's The Witch Boy. And Molly Ostertag, from what I understand, she was like a production designer on Disney TV animation Star vs. the Forces of Evil. I hear so much good about that show, but I've never seen what kind of animation fan am I? I haven't seen one of the big animation shows that's out now. Anyways, this novel is about this 13-year-old boy. His name is Oster. He lives in this family where it's witches and shapeshifters. The boys in the family have to be shapeshifters, and the girls in the family have to be witches. No ifs, ands, or buts. And if anyone tries to, change that, they'll be exiled from the family. So Aster wants to do what his sisters are doing. He wants to try witchcraft. And it turns out he has to do it when a mysterious danger, threatens all of his brothers. So he gets this help of what's been described as a non-conforming friend, and he has to, break the rule in order to save his family. And these are both really cool fantasy, pictures. And there's a little bit of a hint of sci-fi in the first one. And it's kind of cool to see Fox Animation leaning towards that, kind of like animated Harry Potter-esque fantasy series for family audiences. And I'm glad that they're picking up those kinds of films instead of silly comedies. I'm not sure what Fox Animation's overall game plan is going to be, but in the last couple of months they've been picking up projects left and right. Although, for quite some time, they were picking up projects too, and did nothing with them. But it seems like with, because they had kind of a management change not too long ago, it seems like they have a clear plan going ahead. But once I start seeing release dates for these features and, announcements saying, well, they're in production now, then I'll start to believe it. But for now, I like what they're considering. Again, this pet black hole story sounds really good, and so does this witch boy story. So hopefully those ideas, along with all the other ones they've been announcing recently, get picked up. And lastly, I want to briefly talk about Cars 3, because when I was in Walt Disney World, I caught the roughly 15-minute preview for the movie. With each new Disney release, over at Disney's Hollywood Studios, they have like a preview for that movie when you reach the end of the attraction, One Man's Dream. It's this great museum-like attraction that you walk through, and it's all about the history of Walt Disney himself and all of his achievements. It's a history of the company, but it's mostly the history of Walt and what he did. And at the end of that attraction is a theater, and you're treated to a roughly 15-minute preview of what the newest Disney release is. Last time I went, it was for Moana, and then after that I believe it was for Rogue One, then the remake of Beauty and the Beast. Now it's for Cars 3. And I decided to check it out since I was there, and Cars 3, is not out yet. So I checked it out, and I've been looking forward to Cars 3 ever since they announced that it was going to be more like the first movie. And I admittedly really like the first Cars. I love it, actually. So, after all the trailers I've seen, which have all left me impressed, the 15-minute preview, I just said, I'm going to like this. I know I'm going to like this movie. So, if you're a huge fan of the first Cars and were let down by Cars 2, all I can say is this: I think this one is going to be a home run. But if you don't like the Cars series to begin with, I don't think it's going to sway you if you're not into it. But from what I saw, I was impressed. Thanks for listening. Signing off.